Saturday mornings at the facility didn't ask much of me, which was the whole point of taking them. 6 weeks on my sister's couch had come with an understanding neither of us had bothered to spell out twice. I slept on her cushions, I ate whatever was in her refrigerator, and on weekends I sat behind her desk so she could run whatever errands a woman who owned a storage facility needed to run. It wasn't rent. Barbara never called it rent, but we both knew what it was. The office was glass on the side that faced the gate, cinder block everywhere else, and from the chair behind the desk I could see the whole front of the property laid out like a diagram, the keypad standing at the entrance, the chain link fence running the perimeter, and beyond the gate the flat gray stretch of airline highway with its gas stations and tire shops going on in both directions like nobody had ever bothered to finish building it. Behind me, through the one interior door, ran the 4 corridors that made up the guts of the place. A, B, C, D. 200 feet each, 180 units total, climate-controlled cinder block on both sides, corrugated roll-up doors every 10 feet like teeth in a long gray jaw. I'd learned the layout because there was nothing else to look at, not because I cared. That Saturday there was nothing to do and nobody to do it for. No walk-ins, no calls, no delinquent accounts that needed a phone conversation I wasn't equipped to have. I'd wiped the counter twice already, mostly out of boredom. And I was flipping through a 3-ring binder of insurance disclosures I had no intention of reading when I noticed, for the first time in any way that stuck, that I had a straight line of sight down the length of Corridor C. The interior door sat dead center in the back wall of the office, and Corridor C ran off from it in a perfectly straight shot all the way to the rear fence line, 200 feet of cinder block and fluorescent light with nothing to break the view except the row of numbered doors ticking past on either side. From where I sat, I could watch the whole corridor breathe under those long white tubes, steady, flat, institutional light that made everything look like an evidence photo. Except at the far end. The last 4 fixtures, the ones hanging over the last stretch before the corridor dead-ended into nothing, flickered. Not the lazy on-off blink of a dying tube trying to restart itself, but something more broken than that, arrhythmic, like the bulbs couldn't agree with each other on what time it was. Every few seconds, the last 30 feet of the hallway dropped into a kind of gray dimness and then snapped back, dropped and snapped, with no rhythm a person could set a watch to. Barbara had mentioned it to me once, early on, in the tired, half-apologetic way she mentioned anything that was on her list and staying on her list. She'd been meaning to call an electrician about it for months. It kept slipping. There was always something else that needed doing first. A lock that had rusted shut, a tenant who was 2 months behind, paperwork for the county. The flickering lights at the end of Corridor C were a small problem in a business made of small problems, and small problems, I was learning, had a way of just sitting there unattended, blinking at you, until they either fixed themselves or didn't. I sat with the binder open on my lap and watched it happen. Dim, bright, dim, bright. And it occurred to me that in 6 weeks of working this desk, I had never once seen anyone walk all the way down to that end. Renters came and went out of A and B and the front half of C and D constantly, hauling boxes, wheeling dollies, cussing at padlocks. But the back 30 feet, the part under those broken lights, stayed exactly as empty as it looked right now. No cart tracks in the dust past a certain point. No boxes leaned outside a door back there waiting to be carried in. Nothing. I didn't know what was at the very end of it. What unit number even sat under that last dying fixture. And it struck me, sitting there with nothing better to do than notice things, that I should ask Barbara about it sometime. Not urgently, just one of those loose threads I meant to pull on eventually, filed away next to a dozen other things I meant to ask her. Why she kept the thermostat set so high in the break room, whether the vending machine out front had ever worked in her memory, whether she was planning on charging me once I found a job or just letting the couch situation run indefinitely. It went into the same drawer as all of that. I closed the binder, set it back on the shelf under the counter, and let the thought go. The gate stayed shut, The highway hummed along outside the glass, tires and engines blending into one flat sound that never really stopped, just changed pitch now and then when something bigger than a sedan went by. Nobody pulled in. Nobody buzzed the intercom. I sat behind the desk with my feet up against the drawer and my eyes drifting, without much intention behind it, back down the length of corridor C to where the last 4 lights kept flickering over the last 30 feet of empty hallway, going dim, then bright, then dim again, like something back there was breathing. The bell over the front door gave its little electronic chirp, the one Barbara had installed herself with a screwdriver and a bad word or two, and I looked up from the binder to see a stocky man in a polo shirt, already halfway across the office floor, moving like he had a speech prepared and didn't want to lose momentum. "Somebody's been in my unit," he said. No hello. No excuse me. Just that, flat and certain, like he was reading off a warrant. I set the binder down. "Which unit?" 88, B corridor." He planted both hands on the counter, and up close I could see he was maybe 30, built thick through the shoulders with the kind of ruddy face that got redder when he talked. "I stack my boxes a specific way, heavy on the bottom, in order, and the red tote goes on top, always, every single time. I went in there this morning and the red tote's on the side. Somebody moved it." "Okay," I said, because that seemed like the thing to say. "Let me pull up the log." "I'm telling you, the tote was on top." "I heard you." I turned the monitor toward myself and typed in his unit number. "Give me a second." He didn't give me a second so much as he stood there breathing through his nose while I clicked through the access screen, but I let that go. The log came up the way it always did, plain as a grocery receipt. Corridor B, exterior gate entries on the left, individual unit latches on the right, everything time-stamped down to the minute. I scrolled to 88. One entry, 63 days back. A code that matched the one printed on his renter file, the same day the file said he'd moved his things in. Nothing after that. No gate entries that routed anywhere near his unit in the weeks since, either. Nobody's code, not his, not a manager override, not a maintenance flag, just that one line sitting alone at the top. "There's nothing here," I said. "Log shows you went in once, when you moved stuff, and nobody's touched that unit since. Not your code, not anybody's." "That's not right." "That's what it says." "Then it's wrong." He said it the way you'd correct a kid who got a math problem backward, patient on the surface and clipped underneath. "Somebody messed with it, or the systems broke, because I know how I stack my boxes, heaviest on the bottom, in order, red tote on top. I've done it that way my whole life. It doesn't move itself to the side." I looked at the screen again, though there was nothing new on it to look at. "I'm not saying you don't stack them that way. I'm saying the log's complete. Every code that's gone through that door for 2 months is right there, and yours is the only one." "Then check it again." "It's the same screen, man. It's not going to say something different the second time." He didn't like that. His jaw worked for a second before he spoke again. "You calling me a liar?" "No." I kept my voice level because raising it wasn't going to help either of us. "I'm telling you what the log says. Is it possible you moved it yourself last time you were in there and just don't remember doing it? People do that. You're carrying boxes. You're not thinking about which order you set things down in." "I remember exactly how I left that unit." Each word came out separated from the next now, like he was setting them down individually so I couldn't lose track. "The red tote was on top. It is not something I get wrong." "Okay." "Don't okay me like that." He straightened up off the counter. "I want to talk to Barbara." "That's your right." I wasn't going to fight him on it, and honestly, some part of me was relieved to hand the problem to somebody else, even if the somebody else was my sister, and even if she was out running errands and wouldn't thank me for it later. I turned around and found the laminated contact sheet taped to the wall behind the desk. the one with the facility's after-hours number and Barbara's cell listed underneath in her own handwriting, and I read the digits off to him slow enough that he could get them down on his phone. He didn't say thank you. He typed the number in with his thumb, jabbing at the screen harder than it needed, and when he was done, he looked at me one more time like he was deciding whether there was anything left worth saying, decided there wasn't, and turned for the door. The bell chirped again on his way out. Through the glass, I watched him cross the lot toward a beat-up pickup, phone already up at his ear before he'd even reached the door handle. And I figured Barbara was about to have a Saturday afternoon a little worse than the one she'd planned on. I sat back down. The log was still up on the screen, that one lonely entry from 63 days ago sitting there plain as anything, and I didn't have a single reason to doubt it. It recorded every code that hit every latch in this building, mine included, and it didn't forget or lie or get confused about which day it was. If it said nobody had gone into Unit 88 since the day he moved his stuff in, I believed it. Except it wasn't sitting with me quite as simple as that, not entirely. He hadn't looked confused when he described it. He'd looked exact, heaviest on the bottom, in order, red toed on top, always. Still, the log didn't lie. I'd learned that much in 6 weeks behind this desk, if I'd learned anything at all. The log was the one thing in this place that didn't have an opinion. I closed the screen out and let the office go quiet again, the highway humming along outside the glass the same as it always did. Through the front wall, I watched him get into the truck without slowing his stride, still talking into the phone, jaw working the same way it had at the counter, and then he pulled out onto airline and was gone. I turned back around to the empty office and sat there a minute, the binder shut on the counter, the gate outside sitting closed the way it had been all morning. I told myself there wasn't anything in what had just happened worth carrying around for the rest of the shift. Barbara got back a little after 7, tired in the way she got tired on the days she had to deal with the county in person, her shoulders down and her keys already out before she'd cleared the gate. I met her at the office door and told her about Jeffrey before she could ask me how the day had gone, because I wanted it off my plate. I told her he'd come in hot about Unit 88. Boxes moved, red tote on the wrong side, all of it. I told her I'd pulled the log and it showed his own code from 63 days back and nothing since. I told her I'd said as much to him, plain, and that he hadn't liked it, and that he'd said he was going to call her, and I'd given him her number off the sheet because that was his right. She listened to all of it without her face doing much of anything, and when I finished, she just nodded once. "He does that," she said. "Every few months he comes in convinced somebody's been in his unit. Last year it was a missing toolbox. Before that it was his lawnmower being turned to face the door instead of the wall. He never calls. He just needs to say it to somebody." He seemed pretty sure. "He's always pretty sure." She set her bag down on the counter and started going through the mail I'd stacked there, not really looking at it yet. "You did it right. Pull the log, show him the log, let him take it further if he wants. That's the whole job." That should have been the end of it, and for a minute it was. She was flipping through envelopes and I was watching her do it, and outside the light was going that early evening orange that made the parking lot look warmer than it was. But the thing about sitting behind that desk for 6 weeks is you start noticing the shape of a place, whether you mean to or not. There was a shape to Corridor C that had been sitting in the back of my head since about 11 that morning, long before Jeffrey ever walked in. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask me anything. Doesn't mean I'll have an answer." "Unit 114, the one at the far end of C past where the light's been going out." She looked up from the mail then, not sharp, just attentive, the way she looked when a number didn't add up. "What about it?" "I've never seen anybody go down there, not once. 6 weeks and nobody walks past about Unit 105. I thought maybe I just hadn't noticed, but I started paying attention today, and I really haven't seen it. Not a car parked near that end, not a renter, nothing." She set the mail down and leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, and took a second before she answered. "That one's been rented 11 years, she said. "Under a company name, Meridian Pastoral Services. The payment's automatic, comes in the same day every month, has for as long as I've had this place. Nobody's ever come to look at it. Not once that I know of." 11 years and nobody's ever opened it. "Not that I've seen, and I've been here the whole time." She shrugged, like it wasn't much of anything. "It happens more than you'd think. A business rents a unit to keep old files, old equipment, whatever they don't want cluttering up their actual office, and then the business keeps existing on paper, but nobody ever needs whatever's in there again. The rent's cheap enough that it's not worth their while to come clean it out, so it just sits." "Doesn't that seem strange to you? 11 years. "It seems like somebody's paying for storage they don't need," she said. "That's not strange, that's just money nobody's bothered to stop spending." I didn't say anything right away. I was thinking about the light down there, the way it caught every few seconds and let go. The last stretch of corridor sat dimmer than the rest of the place, no matter what time of day you looked at it, like somebody had decided that particular 30 feet didn't need to be seen clearly. "You ever curious what's in there?" "No," she said, and she said it easy. No hesitation in it at all. "It pays on time. It's 1 unit out of 180. It's not my business what somebody keeps in a storage unit as long as they're paying for it, and it's not on fire, and it's not attracting rats. I've got units full of Mardi Gras throws and units full of somebody's dead mother's china, and I don't wonder about those either." She picked the mail back up. "You'll go crazy in this job if you start wondering what's behind every door." She moved off toward the back to check the thermostat, already talking about something else, whether the air conditioning in Unit 40 needed looking at again. I stayed where I was at the counter a minute, hearing her back there flipping the panel open. I thought about that light flickering over 110 through 114, on and off, with nothing behind those doors that anybody in 11 years had ever needed badly enough to come and get. Barbara found me at the counter Tuesday morning with a printout in her hand, and I knew from the way she was holding it that it wasn't good news, though with her that didn't always show in her face. "The payment on 114 bounced," she said. "First time in 11 years. Meridian Pastoral Services." She set the printout down like it was the end of a sentence. "County wants a move-out inventory before I can file the lien. That's the rule for anything past 90 days delinquent, whether it's 90 cents or 90 months. She went into the back and came out with the bolt cutters from the maintenance closet, a digital camera on a cracked wrist strap, and a clipboard with a form clipped to it that had boxes for date, unit number, and general contents. She put all 3 in my hands, one after another, like she was handing off a relay. "Photograph everything inside for the record," she said. "List the contents in general categories. You don't need to write a novel, just enough that the county's happy. Close it back up when you're done. I'll deal with the lien paperwork when I get back." "Where are you going?" "Denham Springs. Supply place has a sale on the plastic bins, and I'm not paying full price twice." She was already pulling her keys off the hook. "I'll be back by 3. I stood there a second after she said it, running the timeline in my head, 6 or 7 hours between now and 3 o'clock. All of it mine. No renters expected. Nothing on the schedule but whatever walked in off Airline Highway on its own. She caught the look on my face. Or maybe she didn't, because she didn't say anything else about it. She just told me to lock the front door if I stepped away from the counter and went out to her truck. I watched her back out onto the highway through the glass, watched her signal, watched the truck go small and disappear toward the interstate. Then it was just me, the clipboard, the bolt cutters heavy in one hand, the camera strap looped around my wrist, and a building with 180 locked doors in it and nobody in any of them. 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. Nobody comes on a Tuesday morning. People come on weekends, when they're moving furniture or dragging out Christmas boxes, or after work when the light's going and they want to grab something before dinner. Tuesday at 11, The lot outside the gate sat empty except for the gravel and the heat coming up off it already. And inside, all 4 corridors were just concrete and quiet, and the hum of the air handlers cycling somewhere in the walls. I went through the interior door and into corridor C. It's 8 feet wide, cinder block close enough on both sides that if you put your arms out, you could nearly touch both walls at once, with a strip of fluorescent tube light running the length of the ceiling and the metal roll-up doors on either side, evenly spaced, numbered above each one. The floor is sealed concrete, and it holds sound in a way that makes your own footsteps sound like somebody else's, coming from a little behind you and a little ahead of you at the same time. I walked. 90-something, 98, 102, counting doors without meaning to, the way you count stairs in the dark. Somewhere past 106, the light overhead started doing what it did. Not going out, not staying steady, just flickering, uneven, no rhythm to it at all, on for 2 seconds, and then almost gone and then back, only over the last 4 fixtures, the ones hanging above 110 through 114. Barbara had told me about that light. She told me she kept meaning to call somebody about it and kept not calling. 114 sat at the very end, same as it had for 11 years, while a company nobody had ever met kept paying to leave it alone. The lock on it was heavy and brass, old-fashioned, gone dull with corrosion that told me nobody had put a hand on it in longer than 11 years' worth of dust would explain. No scratches around the keyhole, no shine worn into the shackle where somebody's thumb would have rubbed it 1,000 times unlocking it. I fitted the bolt cutters around the shackle, and the light dropped out overhead just as I did it, so I was cutting mostly by feel. I squeezed the handles together with my full weight behind it, and the lock gave with a small dry snap, no drama to it at all, and dropped to the concrete and bounced once against my shoe. I picked up the corrugated handle and the light came back on above me the second I did, and I rolled the door up. I stood at the threshold of Unit 114, looking into it for the first time. Every wall of it, left, right, and back, was floor to ceiling with wooden shelving, raw lumber, built by somebody who knew what they were doing, and bolted it straight into the cinder block so it wasn't going anywhere. The shelves went 2 rows deep, and on every shelf, in rows so precise they looked machined, sat glass mason jars. I stopped trying to count them somewhere past 100 and just settled on several hundred, because that was close enough to true. Each one had a metal lid, the kind with a rubber gasket, the kind my grandmother used for canning tomatoes. Each one had a single folded piece of paper inside it, and nothing else. I picked up the jar closest to the door. The glass was cool in my hand. Through it, folded so only the top edge showed, I could read a date, March 4th, 1987, and under that, 3 words, it was me. I set the camera down on the concrete without deciding to. I unscrewed the lid. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges the way old paper gets, brittle looking though it wasn't, and the handwriting was small and careful, like somebody had been taught penmanship and never let go of it. March 4th, 1987. It was me. I told Ruth it was the other boy. It wasn't. He was expelled. He never came back to school. I have thought about this every day since. No name under it. No signature at all. I put that one down and reached for another, 3 shelves over, because I needed to know if it was the only one or if it was a kind. It wasn't the only one. This handwriting was bigger, faster, the letters leaning like the person had been in a hurry to get it out of themselves. 1994. It was me. I let my brother take the blame for the fire. He did 3 years. He doesn't speak to me anymore. I stood in the middle of the unit holding both of them open in my hands, and it arranged itself into something I could name. These were confessions. Not paperwork, not anything a business would file. Somebody's private admission that they had hurt a person and let another person carry it. 2 different decades, 2 different hands, Two different people who had needed, badly enough to write it down and seal it in a jar to put it somewhere. I started down the shelves, reading dates through the glass without opening anything else yet. It ran left to right, oldest to newest, early 80s on the far left wall, and by the time I got to the back right shelf, the dates said 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023, 40 years of it in one storage unit nobody had opened. I opened 3 more, scattered, just to be sure I wasn't imagining a pattern that wasn't there. 2003. A woman who'd let a co-worker get fired for a theft she'd committed herself. 1989. A man who told police he saw nothing when he'd watched a car hit somebody and drive off. 2011. A teenager who lied under oath in a custody hearing. Every single one ended the same way. No name, no signature, just the weight of it, set down and closed up. I called Barbara. She picked up on the second ring, warehouse noise behind her, forklifts or something like it. I told her what I was looking at, the shelving, the jars, the handwriting, the dates running back 40 years, and she went quiet on the other end long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "I'm going to look something up," she said finally, and I heard her thumb working the phone even while she kept talking to me. "Meridian Pastoral Services." It took her under a minute. "There's a website, old one. Small religious counseling practice, ran out of an office on Government Street, closed in 2021. A pause. "There's an obituary. Clay Carpenter, licensed pastoral counselor. Died March of 2021, 71 years old." "So it's real," I said. "It's almost certainly an archiving system," she said, in the voice she uses when she's already decided something and is just walking me toward the same conclusion at a pace I can follow. "People came to this man and confessed things to him, and instead of doing whatever pastors usually do with that, he kept it, physically. This way." She let that sit a second. "There's nothing illegal about it. It's not our business what's in the jars, Michael. Photograph the shelves for the inventory. Write it up as sealed document jars, religious counseling records. Close the unit. I'll deal with the lien paperwork when I get back." "Okay," I said, because it made sense. Stranger than most things made sense, but not impossible, and I wasn't in a position to argue with a filing system built by a dead man. We hung up. I picked the camera back up and got to work. Left wall first, top shelf to bottom, 1 frame per row so Barbara would have something to put in a folder. The light overhead kept doing its thing, dropping out and coming back, and I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a clock ticking. I was calmer than I'd been 10 minutes before. The story fit. I was most of the way down the left wall, working the bottom shelf now, the oldest section, where the jars had gone the deepest yellow and the paper inside had faded to almost nothing against the glass, when I picked one up near the end of the row to get it in frame. The fold was wrong. Every other note in that unit was folded so the writing faced in, showing you a date and an opening line, and nothing else until you opened it. This one was folded outward, turned so that whatever was written on the outside of the fold faced the glass facing me, meant to be read without opening anything at all. It said Barbara Wilkins. I stood there long enough that the light dropped out and came back twice before I moved. Then I unscrewed the lid. The paper wasn't yellow. It was plain white, crisp at the corners. Nothing like the jar it had been sitting in for however many years it had supposedly been sitting there. Somebody had put this in among the oldest ones on purpose, where the dust and the age of everything around it would tell you not to look too close. The handwriting wasn't the cramped, careful script from the pastor's decades. This was upright and even, unhurried, like somebody who had all the time they needed to write exactly what they meant. It was dated 8 years ago. It named a Winn-Dixie on Florida Boulevard, a Tuesday evening, a silver Honda Civic. It described a man following a woman on foot from that parking lot all the way to the door of her building on Evangeline Street, and standing on the sidewalk after she'd gone in, watching, until a light came on upstairs. I know she saw me, it said. I have not stopped thinking about her since that night. It was signed with a single letter. R. I stood in the middle of Unit 114 with the jar open in my hand, and the light over Unit 110 cut out and came back and cut out again, and I understood, without wanting to, that I wasn't holding a confession at all. There was no shame in it, no weight a person needed to set down. It was a record, calm, precise, not written to be forgiven, written to remember it exactly the way it happened. I set that jar down on the shelf, still open, and I didn't close it. I walked to the back wall where the newer jars were, the ones with dates in this decade, and I started pulling every one that looked like the same hand had touched it. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. I just knew the single letter was going to be there again, and I found it 4 more times before I let myself stop. Each one was a different woman, a route to work, laid out street by street, the light she hit at the same time every morning. A car, a blue one, then a white one, then one with a dent in the rear bumper the writer mentioned like it was a detail worth keeping. A window, and what could be seen through it in the evening, and for how long, and from where. The handwriting didn't change. Upright even, unhurried, like a man taking inventory of something he already owned. None of them were confessions. Nobody was sorry for anything. I understood that now the way you understand a smell has changed in a room, all at once, and too late to unknow it. The light over Unit 110 went out and came back on while I stood there, and in the dark second before it returned, I heard myself breathing louder than I wanted to. The last one was on the shelf with the newest dates, back right, tucked between 2 jars that still had their lids on tight. I almost skipped it. I don't know why I didn't. I opened it the way I'd opened the others, expecting another street, another car, and instead I got a house on Sherwood Forest Boulevard. I knew the address before I finished reading it because it was the address I'd been sleeping 15 feet from for 6 weeks. It named the car, a gray Toyota Camry, which was right, which was the car sitting in the driveway right now if nobody had moved it. It described the porch, the 2 chairs, the way the light over the door stayed off until she got home and flipped it on herself, because she didn't like leaving it burning all day for nothing. It gave a time, not an estimate. A time, like a bus schedule. And it was dated 6 weeks ago, which put it 3 days before I'd shown up on her couch with 1 duffel bag and a stack of unpaid bills I hadn't told her about yet. She has not changed. I have been patient. I stood there holding it, and the fluorescent tube over Unit 112 buzzed and dropped out, and the whole back third of the corridor went the color of a bruise for a second before it snapped back. I understood the unit then, all at once, a lie I'd already been half believing without knowing it. The jars on the left, the ones with the cramped little script and the dates going back to the 80s, those were real. Somebody had really sat across from a pastor for 30 years and folded up the worst thing they'd ever done and handed it over to be kept somewhere it couldn't hurt them anymore. That part hadn't changed since Barbara told me about it on the phone with the plausible, almost relieved explanation in her voice. Pastoral records, archived off-site, nobody's business. But somewhere along the way, somebody who had access to this room and no reason anyone would ever check on him had started putting his own paper in with the rest. Hidden inside 4 decades of real grief where nobody would ever have a reason to open jar number 200 and something and read it. The lien only got filed once in 11 years, and only because a payment bounced by accident. Whoever held that account had had the run of this place the entire time. Nobody comes to the back of Corridor C. Nobody's supposed to. I had the jar in one hand, and the phone was already coming up in the other before I decided to do it. It rang. 4 times, 5, and then her voice, flat and recorded, telling me to leave a message and she'd get back to me. "Dana, call me back, right now." I heard my own voice, and it didn't sound like mine, too even, the way you talk when you're trying not to let something out through the cracks in the sentence. I hung up and called again immediately, It rang the same 4 times, the same recording. I stood at the back of Unit 114 with 5 jars open on the shelf in front of me, lids sitting beside them like they'd been set down carefully instead of torn off, and the light over the corridor kept cutting in and out, throwing the whole back wall from bright to black and back again, and Barbara wasn't picking up. I dialed 911 and put the phone to my ear and started walking. It connected. I heard that much, a change in the static, a voice under it somewhere, and I said the address into the phone before she even finished asking for it. But the words came back to me broken and thin, like she was talking through a fan. The cinder block was doing that. 2 feet of block on either side of me, and the signal just died in it. "Say again your location," she said, or something close to that, half of it eaten. "The storage facility on Airline Highway," I said, walking fast now, past the jars still open on the shelf behind me, past Unit 114 with its door still up. "Barbara Wilkins, Sherwood Forest Boulevard. I don't know if you're getting this." Nothing back but the same broken hiss. I kept walking. I kept talking anyway, into a phone that might or might not be carrying my voice anywhere at all. I came through the interior door into the office, and the signal cleared some, enough that her next sentence came through whole. "Can you confirm your address?" "Storage facility on Airline Highway," I said, "near the parish line, Baton Rouge side." I was already moving toward the desk, and I started to say it a 3rd time, slower, spelling it out the way you do when you're not sure the first 2 times landed. And then I looked up through the glass, and there was a car outside the gate that hadn't been there. A dark blue Taurus, parked half on the shoulder, nose pointed east, like it had pulled off in a hurry, and then decided it didn't need to hurry after all. A man was standing at the keypad, middle-aged, heavy-set but settled rather than big, a collared shirt tucked into dark pants like he'd dressed for an office he didn't have anymore. He punched the code in without looking at it. Didn't hunt for the buttons, didn't hesitate over which one came next. The gate started to roll back on its track. He looked up while it was still moving and found me through the glass like he already knew exactly where I'd be standing. And he raised one hand. Not high, just lifted it a little at the wrist and held it there half a second. Easy, familiar, not a stranger's wave. It said, "I see you." I hit the deadbolt on the front door so hard it hurt my thumb. "There's a man entering the property," I said into the phone, and my voice came out flat, the way it does when there isn't room left for anything else in it. "I need police at the Airline Highway address. Now." "Copy that. Units are being dispatched," she said, clear now, clear as anything. And I didn't have time to feel relieved about it because I was already looking at that door and understanding it for what it was. A glass panel and a deadbolt. It would slow down weather. It wouldn't slow down a man. I went through the back of the office at a run. The maintenance corridor was narrower than Corridor C, 4 feet of bare concrete running behind the office block, low pipe insulation overhead. 1 bare bulb every 20 feet that didn't do much against the dark between them. It ran parallel to Corridor A and led out at the far end through a fire door, and behind me, through the wall, through the office, I heard the front door handle turn. Once, then stop. He was trying it politely. I didn't wait to hear if he tried it again. I kept the phone against my ear and kept moving, telling the dispatcher the address again without really thinking about the words anymore. Just keeping the line open. Keeping something of me going out into the world in case none of the rest of this went the way I needed it to. I reached the rear door and put my hand on the push bar and stopped. Because on the other side of it, right on the other side, close enough that I felt it through the metal, something was pressing the bar from outside. Slow. Steady. Not yanking at it, not rattling it. Pressing it, the way you'd lean on something you were confident would eventually give. He'd gone around. There was a fire extinguisher on the wall beside the door, red steel, 10 pounds, the kind that's been hanging there so long nobody thinks about it until they need it. and I had it off the bracket before I'd decided to take it. More reflex than plan, weight settling into my hand like it belonged there. I didn't swing it. There wasn't room and there wasn't time to swing anything. I put my shoulder into the push bar instead and threw everything I had behind it. The door went out fast, faster than I expected, steel swinging on its hinge with my whole weight behind it, and it caught him. I heard it more than saw it, a solid flat sound, shoulder and arm, and he went sideways off the step, off balance, one foot finding air instead of concrete. I didn't stop to watch him fall. I went through the gap while he was still getting his feet under him, turned right along the gravel bank above the canal, water low and black in the channel beside me, and I ran. Michael Wilkins. He said it behind me, easy, unhurried, like he was calling across a room to correct something small I'd gotten wrong, not a shout. Like my name was a fact he already owned and was only now getting around to using. I didn't look back. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the gravel and the fence line ahead of me, and I ran until the ground turned to grass, and the grass turned to the shoulder of Airline Highway, and I put my arm out at the first truck I saw. It was a pickup, westbound, and it slowed and then stopped, gravel crunching under the tires, and the driver leaned across the seat to get a look at me. 50s, work clothes, a face that had already decided something was wrong before I said a word. Call 911, I said, both hands on the doorframe, breathing too hard to say much more. The address is the self-storage on Airline Highway. He didn't ask me why. He picked up his phone off the seat and dialed. I stood there at the edge of the highway with him, both of us waiting, the gate standing open behind us and the office glass catching the noon light and giving nothing back. The whole property gone quiet the way a held breath is quiet. And somewhere back there, behind the fence, on the gravel or the concrete or wherever he'd landed, was a man who knew my name. The units came fast, faster than I expected, lights going before I even heard the sirens, and I flagged them down at the gate with my hand still shaking from the run. 2 deputies got out of the first car, a third from the second, and I gave it to them the way it had happened, in order. I told them about the unit at the end of Corridor C, about the jars, hundreds of them, and the one with my sister's name folded on the outside where you weren't supposed to be able to see a name at all. I told them about the note dated 8 years ago, the parking lot, the apartment on Evangeline Street, the light coming on. I told them about the one from 6 weeks back, the address on Sherwood Forest Boulevard, the gray Camry, the porch, the line at the end that I couldn't stop hearing. She has not changed. I have been patient. And I told them the man had used my name, my whole name, called it after me while I was running, calm, like he was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. The lead deputy wrote all of it down without much expression, and then they went in through the gate ahead of me, hands near their belts, and I stood at the fence and waited because they told me to wait. They found him sitting in the front office, sitting, not standing, like he'd let himself in and made himself at home while I was flagging down a stranger on the highway to save my own life. Through the glass, I watched him talk to the deputies with his hands folded on his knee. Nothing hurried about him, no sign at all that a steel door had caught him in the shoulder 20 minutes before. He gave his name without being asked twice. Calvin Gutierrez, 54, of Baton Rouge. He said he'd been Clay Carpenter's assistant for 12 years, and that when Carpenter died back in March of 2021, the responsibility for the pastoral records in Unit 114 had passed to him. He said the account had missed a payment for the first time in over a decade, and he'd only come to check the unit was secure. He said he had documentation of all of it, his years with Carpenter, his authority over the records, and that he would be glad to provide it. He said I had panicked. He said it plainly, almost kindly. A detective showed up not long after, a heavy-set man in plain clothes who introduced himself and then didn't waste time on anything but the facts. I gave him the 5 jars I'd pulled and left sitting open on the desk, the 4 signed with nothing but the letter R, describing 4 women I didn't know, and the 5th with my sister's name folded where it shouldn't have been folded, and I told him about the note dated 6 weeks ago and how it ended. He read them standing at the counter, slow, reading each one twice before he set it down. Then he asked me to call my sister. Barbara answered on the 4th ring, her voice pitched low and a little annoyed. She was at the Lowe's in Denham Springs, she said. Her phone had been on silent. She was fine. She was on her way back now. Don't tell her anything else until she got there because she didn't want it in pieces. She got there in under 30 minutes. She read the note in front of the detective standing at the same counter. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said she remembered him. A man, 8 years ago, following her from the Winn-Dixie on Florida Boulevard all the way to the door of her building on Evangeline Street, standing on the sidewalk until her light came on upstairs. She said she never reported it because she hadn't been sure enough, at the time, that it was what it looked like. She was sure now. They held Calvin for questioning most of that afternoon. He never raised his voice, not once. Not even when the detective pushed him on the jars signed R. He said he had no knowledge of those notes. He said the jars belonged to the practice, all of them, and that he hadn't opened or looked through them in years. That wasn't his place, he said. That was Carpenter's business. And Carpenter was dead. They ran his name and came back with nothing. No record, no priors, nothing on file anywhere that said he was a danger to anyone. The detective came out to find us in the lot before he let him go. He didn't quite meet my eyes when he came over, like he'd already made up his mind before he said a word. He came in on a valid code, he said. Account holder for the business on file. No forced entry. Front door was locked from inside the whole time. He never touched it. Standing outside a building isn't a crime. He looked at the jars, still in a bag on the seat of his car. And these, they describe things that happened. Watching somebody, following somebody. It's ugly. It's not on paper a threat. Nothing here says he's going to do anything, just that he already did. He knows where she lives, I said. He wrote down her car, her porch, when she gets home. I know, he said, and didn't argue with me, which was somehow worse than if he had. I'm telling you what I've got. It's not enough for an arrest, not today. Barbara didn't say much to that. She just nodded once, the way she does when she's already moved past arguing and started planning, and told the detective she'd be changing her locks that night. She would change her number too. She'd ask Miss Odette next door to keep an eye on the house. Calvin came out through the gate a little after 3, unhurried, a deputy walking beside him without a hand on him, because there was nothing to hold him by. He didn't look our way. He got into the dark blue Taurus parked on the shoulder where it had been sitting all morning, started it, and pulled off north toward the highway like a man leaving a meeting that had run a little long. I stood in the parking lot and watched the car go small in the distance, the detective's words still sitting in my chest where I couldn't put them down. Not enough for an arrest at this time. 2 weeks is long enough to learn a couch. I knew which cushion had gone soft on the left arm, knew the exact angle that kept the springs from finding my spine, knew that Barbara's air conditioner kicked on at 11 and again around 2, a low hum that used to put me to sleep and now just gave the dark something to fill with. I hadn't gone back to Corridor C. Barbara had covered the desk herself the last 2 Saturdays and I hadn't asked why, and she hadn't offered. But I still walked it at night, in my head, the way you walk a room you used to live in. Through the interior door, 8 feet wide, cinder block both sides, the strip lights holding steady until you passed Unit 104 and then starting to flicker, the last 30 feet going bright, dark, bright, dark. No rhythm to it at all. I could see the shelves without trying. Floor to ceiling, both side walls and the back, jars in rows 2 deep, and somewhere in that math the ones I hadn't opened. The ones on the back right shelf, 2023, still sealed, still sitting there being whatever they were. The detective had taken 5 jars, 4 signed with a single letter, describing women who weren't my sister, and the 5th with Barbara's name folded to the outside where anybody flipping through fast enough might have caught it and anybody careful enough was never going to look. 5 jars out of what I'd guessed was several hundred. The rest stayed exactly where they were because the lien paperwork needed a second missed payment and the county wasn't going to hurry itself for a storage unit that had, on paper, resumed paying its bill like nothing had happened. I was on the couch with the television off and the ceiling doing nothing interesting when Barbara came out of the kitchen holding her phone the way you hold something that might be hot. "Michael." I sat up. She didn't usually walk in here after 10 unless it was something. "Payment came through," she said, "for 114. "Bounced again?" "No." She turned the phone so I could see the screen, though I couldn't have read it from that distance and she knew it. It was just something to do with her hands. "Cleared. Same account. Meridian Pastoral Services, same as always." I sat there a second working out what was wrong with that sentence before I landed on it. "It bounced last month." "It did. So somebody fixed it." "That's what I called to find out." She sat down on the arm of the recliner, not the recliner itself, like she wasn't planning to stay. "Talked to the payment processor. Asked who put money back into that account. They said the payment originated from the account on file, registered to Meridian, and that's all they'd tell me. Said anything past that, whose name is actually behind it, who logged in and authorized it, they can't release without a subpoena." "So you called the detective?" "I called the detective." She said it flat, the way she says most things she doesn't like, and I waited, because I'd learned 2 weeks ago that she gets to the bad part on her own schedule, and pushing her just slows her down. "He ran it," she said. "Meridian Pastoral Services was dissolved, 2022, a year after Carpenter died. It doesn't exist anymore, not on paper, not with the state." "But the account's still open." "The account's active, funded. Just made a payment 2 weeks after Calvin sat in our office and told a deputy he hadn't opened those jars in years." She looked at the phone again, though there was nothing left on it to look at. "The name on the account is Clay Carpenters." I didn't say anything right away because for a second I thought I'd misheard her, the way you mishear a word you already know the shape of and just can't make land. "Carpenter's dead," I said. 3 years now." "Then who?" "Nobody can explain it," she said before I finished the question, because it was the same question the detective hadn't been able to answer either. "That's what he told me. There's no basis to do anything about it. A dead man's account made a payment on a unit that's rented in a dissolved company's name, and none of that breaks a law he can point to." I sat there with my hands flat on my knees, looking at the dark television like it might have something to add. "So the unit stays rented," I said. "The unit stays rented." Neither of us said anything else for a while. The air conditioner clicked on somewhere behind the wall, that low, steady hum filling in around us the way it does. Barbara stood up off the arm of the recliner and told me goodnight in the same voice she uses for everything, then went down the hall to her room. I heard her door close soft instead of shut hard, which with her means she's not angry, just tired in a way that doesn't have a good place to put itself. I lay back down. The cushion took its shape under me the way it always does now, and I stared up at the ceiling and went back to corridor C without meaning to, the way you go back to a sore tooth. Left wall, oldest jars, yellowed paper, dates from the 80s going forward a shelf at a time, right wall and back, newer, less yellow, up through 22 and 23. I thought about the ones on that back shelf I never got to, sitting closed, never opened, never photographed. Whatever was folded inside them still folded, still facing whatever way somebody had folded it to face. Somebody was still paying for that unit. Somebody who knew the account, knew the login, knew enough to move money through a business that had been dead on paper for a year, and a man who'd been dead for 3. It wasn't Calvin sitting in a car on the shoulder of Airline Highway with nothing to hold him by. It was somebody who didn't need to be there in person at all, who could keep the lights on in that unit from wherever they actually were, and who had done it 2 weeks after the one time anybody had gotten close enough to see inside. Barbara hadn't asked me to leave. She hadn't said, "Get your own place," hadn't said maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while until this settles. She'd just gone to bed. I was still here, on her couch, in her house, and the jars were still there too. In that unit, behind that corrugated door I'd rolled back down and left unlocked because there was nothing left to lock it with. I lay in the dark a long time, the flickering lights of Corridor C running behind my eyes, whether I wanted them there or not. 4 fixtures going bright, dark, bright, dark over a door nobody had any legal reason to open again. Somewhere behind all of it, steady as the air conditioner cycling on, sat the fact that wouldn't move. Whoever it was hadn't stopped. They'd just paid the bill.